Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and today we will be doing more. A Testament of Hope, the speeches and writings of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Today we will be getting into a new section, chapter, whatever you want to call it. And it's speeches that are political, wedged between democracy and black nationalism. The piece we're going to read today is of fairly long length, 9 pages, I believe it was. So bear with me. It's called Facing the Challenge of a New Age. Dr. King struggled to mediate between his own middle class and Christian commitment to nonviolent resistance and to integration are evident in this edited version of his address before the first annual Institute on Nonviolence and Social Change, which was held in Montgomery, Alabama in December of 1956. Those of us who live in the 20th century are privileged to live in one of the most momentous periods of human history. It is an exciting age filled with hope. It is an age in which a new social order is being born. We stand today between two worlds, the dying old and the emerging new. Now I am aware of the fact that there are those who would contend that we live in the most ghastly period of human history, that they argue that the rhythmic beat of the deep rumblings of discontent from Asia, the uprisings in Africa, the nationalistic longings of Egypt, the roaring cannons from Hungary, and the racial tensions of America are all indicative of the deep and tragic midnight which encompasses our civilization. They would argue that we are retrogressing instead of progressing. But far from representing retrogression and tragic meaninglessness, the present tensions represent the necessary pains that accompany the birth of anything new. Long ago, the Greek philosopher Heraclitus or Heraclitus, I guess would be right, argued that justice emerges from the strife of opposites, and Hegel, in modern philosophy, reached a doctrine of growth through struggle. It is both historically and biologically true that there can be no birth and growth without birth and growing pains. Whenever there is the emergence of the new, we confront the recalcitrance of the old. So the tensions which we witness in the world today are indicative of the fact that a new world order is being born and an old order is passing away. We are all familiar with the old order that is passing away. We have lived with it for many years. We have seen it in its international aspect in the form of colonialism and imperialism. There are approximately 2,400,000,000 people in this world, and the vast majority of these people are colored. About 1,600,000,000 of the people of the world are colored. 50 years ago, or even 25 years ago, most of these 1,600,000,000 people lived under the yoke of some foreign power. We could turn our eyes to China and see their 600 million men and women under the pressing yoke of British, Dutch, and French rule. We could turn our eyes to Indonesia and see 100 million men and women under the domination of the Dutch. We could turn to India and Pakistan and notice 400 million brown men and women under the pressing yoke of the British. We could turn our eyes to Africa and notice their 200 million black men and women under the pressing yoke of the British, the Dutch, and the French. For years, all of the people were dominated politically, exploited economically, and segregated and humiliated. But there comes a time when people get tired. There comes a time when people get tired of being trampled over by the iron feet of oppression. There comes a time when people get tired of being plunged across the abyss of exploitation, where they experience the bleakness of nagging despair. There comes a time when people get tired of being pushed not by the glittering sunlight of life's July and left standing in the piercing chill of an alpine November. So, in the midst of their tiredness, these people decided to rise up and protest against injustice. As a result of their protest, more than 100 billion or 1,300,000,000 uh, of the colored people of the world are free today. They have their own governments, their own economic systems, and their own educational systems. They have broken loose from the Egypt of colonialism and imperialism, and they are now moving through the wilderness of adjustment toward the promised land of cultural integration. As they look back, they see the old order of colonialism and imperialism passing away, and the new order of freedom and justice coming into being. We have also seen the old order in our own nation in the form of segregation and discrimination. We know something of the long history of this old order in America. It has been It has had its beginning in the year 1619, when the first Negro slaves landed on the shores of this nation. They were brought from the soils of Africa, and unlike the Pilgrim Fathers who landed at Plymouth a year later, they were brought here against their wills. Throughout slavery, the Negro was treated in a very inhuman fashion. He was a thing to be used, not a person to be respected. He was merely a depersonalized cog in a vast plantation machine. The famous Dred Scott decision of 1857 well illustrates the status of the Negro during slavery. In this decision, the Supreme Court of the United States said, in substance, that the Negro is not a citizen of the United States. He is merely property subject to the dictates of his owner. Then came 1896. It was in this year that the Supreme Court of this nation, through the Plessy versus Ferguson decision, established the doctrine of separate but equal as the law of the land. Through this decision, segregation gained legal and moral sanction. The end result of the Plessy doctrine was that it led to a strict enforcement of the separate, with hardly the slightest attempt to abide by the equal. So the Plessy doctrine ended up making for tragic inequalities and ungodly exploitation. Living under these conditions, many Negroes came to the point of losing faith in themselves. They came to feel that perhaps they were less than human. The great tragedy of physical slavery was that it led to mental slavery. As long as the Negro maintained his subservient attitude and accepted this place assigned to him, a sort of racial peace existed. But it was an uneasy peace in which the Negro was forced patiently to accept insult, injustice, and exploitation. It was a negative peace. True peace is not merely the absence of some negative force, tension, confusion, or war. It is the presence of some positive force, justice, goodwill, and brotherhood. And so the peace which existed between the races was a negative peace devoid of any positive and lasting quality. Then something happened to the Negro. Circumstances made it necessary for him to travel more. His rural plantation background was gradually being supplanted by migration to urban and industrial communities. His economic life was gradually rising to decisive proportions. His cultural life was gradually rising through the already steady decline, crippling illiteracy. Crippling illiteracy. All of these factors conjoined to cause the Negro to take a new look at himself. Negro masses began to reevaluate themselves. The Negro came to feel that he was somebody. His religion revealed to him that God loves all of his children, and that every man, from a base black to a treble white, a significant is significant on God's keyboard. So he could now cry out with the eloquent poet, fleecy locks and black complexion cannot forfeit nature's claim. Skin may differ, but affection dwells in black and white the same. And were I so tall as to reach the pole, or to grasp the ocean at a span, I must be measured by my soul. The mind is the standard of the man. With this new self-respect and new sense of dignity on the part of the Negro, the South's negative peace was rapidly undermined. And so the tension which we are witnessing in race relations today can be explained in part by the revolutionary change in the Negro's evaluation of himself and his determination to struggle and sacrifice until the walls of segregation have finally been crushed by the battering rams of surging justice. Along with the emergence of a new Negro, with a new sense of dignity and destiny, came that memorable decision of May the 17th, 1954. In this decision, the Supreme Court of the nation unanimously affirmed that the old Plessy doctrine must go. This decision came as a legal and sociological death blow to an evil that had occupied the throne of American life for several decades. It affirmed in no uncertain terms that separate facilities were inherently unequal, and that to segregate a child because of his race is to deny him equal protection of the law. With the coming of the great decision, we could gradually see the old order of segregation and discrimination passing away, and the new order of freedom and justice coming into being. Let nobody fool you. All of the loud noises that you hear today from the legislative halls of the South in terms of interposition and nullification and of outlawing the NAACP are merely the death groans from the dying system. The old order is passing away and the new order is coming into being. We are witnessing in our day the birth of a new age with a new structure of freedom and justice. Now, as we face the fact of this new emerging world, we must face the responsibilities that come along with it. The new age brings with it new challenges. Let us consider some of the challenges of this new age. First, we are challenged to rise above the narrow confines of our individualistic concerns to the broader concerns of all humanity. The new world is a world of geographical togetherness. This means that no individual or nation can live alone. We must all learn to live together, or we will be forced to die together. This new world of geographical togetherness has been brought about to a great extent by man's scientific and technological genius. Man, through his scientific genius, has been able to dwarf distance and place, time in chains. He has been able to carve highways through the stratosphere. And so it is possible today to eat breakfast in New York City and dinner in Paris, France. Bob Hope has described this new jet age in which we live. It is an age in which we will be able to get a nonstop flight from Los Angeles, California to New York City. And if by chance we develop hiccups on taking off, we will hick in Los Angeles and cup in New York City. It is an age in which one will be able to leave Tokyo on Sunday morning and, because of time difference, arrive in Seattle, Washington on the preceding Saturday night. When your friends meet you at the airport in Seattle inquiring when you left Tokyo, you will have to say, "I left tomorrow." This, in a very humorous sense, says to us that our world is geographically one. Now we are faced with the challenge of making it spiritually one. Through our scientific genius, we have made the world a neighborhood. Now, through our moral and spiritual genius, we must make it a brotherhood. We are involved in the single process. Whenever whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. We are all links in the great chain of humanity. This is what John Donne meant when he said years ago, "No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a cloud be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as the promontory were, as well as if a manner of thy friends or of thine own were, any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never sin to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee." A second challenge that the New Age brings to each of us is that of achieving excellency in our various fields of endeavor. In the New Age, many doors will be opening to us that were not opened in the past. And the great challenge which we confront is to be prepared to enter these doors as they open. Ralph Waldo Emerson said in an essay back in 1871, "If a man can write a better book, or preach a better sermon, or make a better mousetrap than his neighbor, even if he builds his house in the woods, the world will make a beaten path to his door." In the New Age, we will be forced to compete with people of all races and nationalities. Therefore, we cannot aim merely to be good. Negro teachers, good Negro doctors, good Negro ministers, good Negro skilled laborers. We must set out to do a good job, irrespective of race, and do it so well that nobody could do it better. Whatever your life's work is, do it well, even if it does not fall in the category of one of the so-called big professions. Do it well. As one college president said, a man should do his job so well that the living, the dead, and the unborn could do it no better. If it falls your lot to be a street sweeper, sweep streets like Michelangelo painted pictures, like Shakespeare wrote poetry, like Beethoven composed music. sweep streets so well that all the host of heaven and earth will have to pause and say, Here lived a great street sweeper who swept his job well. As Douglas Malloch says, if you can't be a pine on the top of a hill, be a scrub in the valley, but be the best little scrub by the side of the hill. Be a bush if you can't be a tree. If you can't be a highway, just be a trail. If you can't be the sun, be a star. If it isn't the size that you win or fail, be the best of whatever you are. A third challenge that stands before us is that of entering the new age with understanding goodwill. This simply means that the Christian virtues of love, mercy, and forgiveness should stand at the center of our lives. There is the danger that those of us who have lived so long under the yoke of oppression, those of us who have been exploited and trampled over, those of us who have had to stand amid the tragic midnight of injustice and indignities will enter the new age with hate and bitterness. But if we retaliate with hate and bitterness, the new age will be nothing but a duplication of the old age. We must blot out the hate and injustice of the old age with the love and justice of the new. This is why I believe so firmly in nonviolence. Violence never solves problems, it only creates new and more complicated ones. If we succumb to the temptation of being violence in our struggle for justice, unborn generations will be the recipients of the long and desolate night of bitterness, and our chief legacy to the future will be an endless reign of meaningless chaos. We have before us the glorious opportunity to inject a new dimension of love into the veins of our civilization. There is still a voice crying out in terms that echo across the generations, saying, Love your enemies, bless them that curse you, pray for them that respitefully use you, that you may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. This love might well be the salvation of our civilization. This is why I am so impressed with our motto for the week: freedom and justice through love, not through violence, not through hate, not even through boycotts, but through love. It is true that as we struggle for freedom in America, we will have to boycott at times. But must remember as we boycott that a boycott is not an end within itself. It is merely a means to awaken a sense of shame within oppressors and challenge their false sense of superiority. But the end is reconciliation. The end is redemption. The end is the creation of the beloved community. It is the type of spirit and this type of love that can transform oppressors into friends. It is this type of understanding goodwill that will transform the deep gloom of the old age into the exuberant gladness of the new age. It is this love which will bring about miracles in the hearts of men. Now I realize that in talking so much about love, it is very easy to become sentimental. There is the danger that our talk about love will merely be empty words devoid of any practical and true meaning. But when I say love those who oppose you, I am not speaking of love in the sentimental or affectionate sense. It would be nonsense to urge men to love their oppressors in an affectionate sense. When I refer to love at this point, I mean understanding goodwill. The Greek language comes to our aid at this point. The Greek language has three words for love. First, it speaks of love in terms of eros. Plato used the word quite frequently in his dialogues. Eros is the type of aesthetic love. Now it has come to mean a sort of romantic love. I guess Shakespeare was thinking in terms of eros when he said, love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no, it is an ever fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It is a star to ever re-wandering bark. This is eros. And then the Greek talks about philia. Philia is sort of intimate affectionateness between personal friends. It is a sort of reciprocal love. On this level, a person loves because he is loved. Then the Greek language comes out with another word, which is the highest level of love. It speaks of it in terms of agape. Agape means nothing sentimental or basically affectionate. It means understanding, redeeming goodwill for all men. It is an overflowing love which seeks nothing in return. It is the love of God working in the lives of men. When we rise to love on the agape level, we love men not because we like them, not because their attitudes and ways appeal to us, but because God loves us. Here we rise to the position of loving the person who does the evil deed while hating the deed that the person does. With this type of love and understanding goodwill, we will be able to stand amid the radiant glow of the new age with dignity and discipline. Yes, the new age is coming. It is coming mighty fast. Now, the fact that this new age is emerging reveals nothing basic about the universe, or something basic about the universe. It tells us something about the core and heartbeat of the cosmos. It reminds us that the universe is on the side of justice. It says to those who struggle for justice, "You do not struggle alone, but God struggles with you." This belief that God is on the side of truth and justice comes down to us from the long tradition of our Christian faith. There is something at the very center of our faith which reminds us that Good Friday may occupy the throne for a day, but ultimately it must give way to the triumphant beat of the drums of Easter. Evil may so shape events that Caesar will occupy a palace and Christ a cross, but one day that same Christ will rise up and split history into AD and BC, so that every life of Caesar must be dated by his name. There is something in this universe that justifies Carlyle in saying, "No one can live forever." There is something in this universe which justifies William Cullen Bryant in saying, "Truth crushed to earth will rise again." There is something in this universe that justifies James Russell Lowell in saying, "Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet that scaffold sways the future, and behind the dim unknown stands God, within the shadows, keeping watch above his own." And so here in Montgomery, after more than 11 long months, I can walk and never get weary, because we know that there is a great camp meeting at the promised land of freedom and justice. Before closing, I must correct what might be a false impression. I am afraid that if I close at this point, many will go away misinterpreting my whole message. I have talked about the new age, which is fastly coming into being. I have talked about the fact that God is working in history to bring about this new age. There is the danger, therefore, that after hearing all of this, you will go away with the impression that we can go home, sit down, and do nothing, waiting for the coming of the inevitable. You will somehow feel that this new age will roll in on the wheels of inevitability, so there is nothing to do but wait on it. If you get that impression, you are the victims of an illusion wrapped in superficiality. We must speed up the coming of the inevitable. Now, it is true, if I may speak figuratively, that old man segregation is on his deathbed. But history has proven that social systems have a great last minute breathing power, and the guardian of a status quo are always on hand with their oxygen tents to keep the old order alive. Segregation is still a fact, in America. We will still confront it in the South in its glaring and conspicuous forms. We will still confront it in the North in its hidden and subtle forms. But if democracy is to live, segregation must die. Segregation is a glaring evil. It is utterly unchristian. It relegates the segregated to the status of a thing rather than elevates them to the status of a person. Segregation is nothing but slavery covered up with certain niceties of complexity. Segregation is a blatant denial of the unity which we all have in Jesus Christ. So we must continue to struggle against segregation in order to speed up the coming of the inevitable. We must continue to gain the ballot. This is one of the basic keys to the solution of our problem. Until we gain political power through possession of the ballot, we will be convenient tools of unscrupulous politicians. We must face the appalling fact that we have been betrayed by both the Democratic and Republican parties. The Democrats have betrayed us by capitulating to the whims and caprices of the Southern Dixiecrats. The Republicans have betrayed us by capitulating to the blatant hypocrisy of right-wing reactionary Northerners. This coalition of Southern Democrats and Northern right-wing Republicans defeats every proposed bill on civil rights. Until we gain the ballot and place proper public officials in office, this condition will continue to exist. In communities where we confront difficulties in gaining the ballot, we must use all legal and moral means to remove these difficulties. We must continue to struggle through legalism and legislation. There are those who contend that integration can come only through education, for no other reason than that morals cannot be legislated. I choose, however, to be dialectical at this point. It is neither education nor legislation. It is both legislation and education. I quite agree that it is impossible to change a man's internal feelings merely through law. But this really is not the intention of the law. The law does not seek to change one's internal feelings. It seeks rather to control the external effects of those internal feelings. For instance, the law cannot make a man love. Religion and education must do that. But it can control his efforts to lynch. So, in order to control the external effects of prejudiced internal feelings, we must continue to struggle through legislation. Another thing we must do in pressing on for integration is to invest our finances in the cause of freedom. Freedom has always been an expensive thing. History is a fit testimony to the fact that freedom is rarely gained without sacrifice and self-denial. So we must donate large sums of money to the cause of freedom. We can no longer complain that we do not have the money. Statistics reveal that the economic life of the Negro is rising to decisive proportions. The annual income of the American Negro is now more than $16 billion, almost equal to the national income of Canada. So we are gradually becoming economically independent. It would be a tragic indictment on both our self-respect and practical freedom of the Negro if history reveals that at the height of the 20th century, the Negro spent more for frivolities than for the cause of freedom. We must never let it be said that we spent more for the evanescent and ephemeral than for the eternal values of freedom and justice. Another thing that we must do in speeding up the coming of the new age is to develop intelligent, courageous, and dedicated leadership. This is one of the pressing needs of the hour. In this period of transition and growing social change, there is a dire need for leaders who are calm and growing, or who are calm and yet positive. Leaders who avoid the extremes of hot-headedness and Uncle Tomism. The urgency of the hour calls for leaders of wise judgment and sound integrity. Leaders not in love with money, but in love with justice. Leaders not in love with publicity, but in love with humanity. Leaders who can subject their particular egos to the greatness of the cause. To paraphrase Holland's words, God gave us leaders. A time like this demands strong minds, great hearts, true faith, and ready hands. Leaders whom the loss of office does not kill. Leaders whom the spoils of life cannot buy. Leaders who have honor. Leaders who will not lie. Leaders who possess opinions and a will. Leaders who can stand before a demagogue and damn his treacherous flatteries without winking. Tall leaders, sun-crowned, who live above the fog in public duty and private thinking. Finally, if we are to speed up the coming of the new age, we must have the moral courage to stand up and protest against injustice wherever we find it. Wherever we find segregation, we must have the fortitude to passively resist it. I realize that this will mean suffering and sacrifice. It might even mean going to jail. If such is the case, we must be willing to fill up the jailhouses of the South. It might even mean physical death. But if physical death is the price that some must pay to free their children from a permanent life of psychological death, then nothing could be more honorable. Once more, it might well turn out that the blood of the martyr will be the seed of the tabernacle of freedom. Someone will ask, how will we face the acts of cruelty and violence that might come as results of our standing up for justice? What will be our defense? Certainly, it must not be retaliatory violence. We must find our defense in the amazing power of unity and courage that we have demonstrated in Montgomery. Our defense is to meet every act of violence toward an individual Negro with the facts that there are thousands of others who will present themselves in his place as potential victims. Every time one school teacher is fired for standing up courageously for justice, it must be faced with the fact that there are 4,000 more to be fired. If the oppressors bomb the home of one Negro for his courage, this must be met with the fact that they must be required to bomb the homes of 50,000 more Negroes. This dynamic unity, this amazing self-respect, this willingness to suffer, and this refusal to hit back will soon cause the oppressor to become ashamed of his own methods. He will be forced to stand before the world and his gods splattered with the blood and reeking with the stench of his Negro brother. There is nothing in all the world greater than freedom. It is worth paying for. It is worth losing a job. It is worth going to jail for. I would rather be a free pauper than a rich slave. I would rather die in abject poverty with my convictions than live in inordinate riches with the lack of self-respect. Once more, every Negro must be able to cry out with his forefathers, before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my father and be saved. If we will join together in doing all of these things, we will be able to speed up the coming of the new world. A new world in which men will live together as brothers. As world in which men will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. A world in which men will no longer take necessities from the masses to give luxuries to the classes. A world in which all men will respect the dignity and worth of all human personality. Then we will be able to sing from the great tradition of our nation. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty. Of thee I sing, land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. This must become literally true. Freedom must ring from every mountainside. Yes, let it ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, from the mighty Alleghenies of Pennsylvania, from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from every mountainside, from every molehill in Mississippi, from Stone Mountain of Georgia, from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee, yes, and from every hill and mountain of Alabama. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. When this day finally comes, the morning stars will sing together, and the sons of God will shout for joy. And a copy of this speech was printed in Phylon number 28. But yeah, it's a pretty big speech, but he kind of covers everything that he's covered in the other speeches all in one speech here. You know, agape, brotherhood, nonviolence, love your oppressor, but not the deeds they perform. And he really ties the biblical teachings with it. But yeah, I am hurting. My throat is dry as can be, and my lips. But as always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'm going to go get a drink. But until next time, later.